All right, welcome everyone to When Revenue Strategy and RevOps Collide. I'm Jonathan Moss. I'm the EVP at Experity. Background, 20 plus year go-to-market operator. So I've done everything from marketing, sales, customer success, RevOps enablement, anything in the go-to-market landscape across many different size companies, from publicly traded companies with billion-dollar revenue to smaller growth startup companies. And so today I'm excited to walk you through again when revenue strategy and RevOps collide. So last week in San Francisco, Winning by Design held its Impact Summit. If you were there, you heard Jocko open it. If you were not, here's what he opened with: funnelism. The argument was that we've been running a growth engine on a 100-year-old idea, that acquisition is the business, and that idea has to end. Growth is not a funnel, growth is a system. And I want to pick up exactly where that left off. Because if growth was a system, a question opens up underneath it that the funnel never made us ask: who runs that system? But let's start with what's changed underneath us first. The buyer got rebuilt. Here's the shape of it. There are 4 phases. Everyone builds on the last. And they all coexist right now in the same pipeline, in the same week, on the same call. Phase 1 is human to human with AI behind the scenes. A rep on a call with a buyer, AI is in the prep, the research, the follow-up. Both sides know it, neither side admits it. Phase 2, human plus AI to human plus AI. Both sides bring co-pilots into the live conversation. The buyer's AI is checking your stat in real time, while your AI is feeding your next discovery question. This is the phase that most companies are about to walk into, and the one fewest are ready for. Phase 3 is human to AI. One side is fully autonomous. A buyer's procurement agent negotiates with your human rep. And phase 4 is AI to AI. The agent on their side talks to an agent on your side. Discovery, negotiation, contract, payment. Humans in the loop only when they need an exception. You need to understand these phases, because if you do not know what phase your customer is in, you cannot architect it. And the gap is already showing up in the curves. This is the growth velocity chart that was put on the screen. Cursor, Harvey, Workday, T2, D3, 2 ways of scaling on one chart. One scales with people, one scales with the system. The companies on the system curve are not running a faster funnel. They're running an entirely different company. So here's where I want to take a little bit step further. The moment growth stops being a funnel and becomes a system, something breaks in the org chart. For 25 years, the C-suite has set the strategy, and ELT, CRO, and RevOps are expected to execute it and report back. It's a clean hierarchy. Strategy decided on top, operations ran underneath. But a system does not respect that hierarchy. When the system is the strategy, operations is no longer underneath anything. And when you cannot set a growth model, you cannot instrument. The people setting the strategy are no longer above anything. The two run straight into each other. So the question is not whether your company has an AI strategy. Almost everyone has an AI strategy. The question is harder. When strategy and operations collide, who is standing at the point of impact? That's the diagnostic that we're about to run. 65 points. That is the gap between the share of organizations deploying AI, which is 76%, and the share running AI in production, which is 11%. Sit with that gap for just a second. 3/4 of companies have AI in the budget. 1 in 9 actually has AI doing work. The 65% stuck in the middle is what I want to talk about, because that gap is not a technology gap. It's an architecture gap. And it sorts companies into 3 modes. I think about every company I work with through 3 modes: tourist, resident, and architect. Tourist mode is where about 75% of companies are. individual tools, personal productivity, ChatGPT for drafts, Copilot or Claude Code for code, maybe a chatbot on the website. The question a tourist company asks itself is, are we using AI? Everyone passes that test. Everybody's using AI. And here's the tell that matters for this thought. In a tourist company, strategy and operations haven't not merged at all. They're still sitting in the old hierarchy and nobody's noticed, but it's about to break. Tourists have a great time. They take photos, they learn things, they come home with stories. The efficiency gains are real. The budget line looks good on the board slide. But tourists don't put down roots. They do not build the city, and the transformation does not happen. In resident mode is where about 15% of companies are. They have connected workflows, automated pipelines, agents that share context. Something runs on a schedule. Humans review the output, but they do not generate it. The question a resident company asks is, what ran this week without anyone touching it? In a resident company, strategy and operations have started to overlap. Operations is making calls that used to belong to the C-suite. The collision has begun and it is being managed informally, person to person. Architect mode, though, is about less than 2% of companies today. The system thinks. There's a knowledge graph, agent teams, feedback loops. It's like a digital company inside of a company. The question an architect company asks is, what did the system catch before any human asked? In an architect company, strategy and operations are not two separate things anymore. They are one thing with one owner, and the collision resolved into a role. So do this right now in your head. Pick one, not the flattering answer, the honest one. Where does your company actually sit today? Tourist, resident, or architect? Don't overthink it. Your gut already knows, and your gut is worth more than anything. Here's what I'd put money on. If you're a company like almost every company I run this diagnostic with, you landed on tourist. A small group landed on resident, and almost nobody landed on architect. That is the real market distribution today. So if you just put yourself on tourist, you're not behind. You're average. The whole point of what I'm going to talk to you about is what to do about it. So the thing to sit with is that gap is not the model. Everybody has access to the same models. You and your competitor are calling the same APIs. The gap is the system around the model. The data the model can see, the workflows it is wired into, the feedback loops it's learning from, the governance that decides which model gets which decision. So one bracket before we go further, because not everyone here is running the same kind of company. If you're a pre-Series B, the collision math runs in your favor because you're not retiring 25 years of debt. You have not taken it on yet. So build a system that's small, build it right, and you skip the whole wreckage the rest of this talk is about to describe. Avoid the debt is a much easier game than retiring it. If that is you, treat the next 30 minutes as a list of things not to do. For everyone else, here's the trap. The tourist's instinct is to bolt on AI to existing processes. Let's add a copilot to the SDR team, chatbot to the website, add an AI summary to a forecast call. They give you faster, bad outputs, more confident, wrong answers. AI does not fix what is broken, it scales what is broken. Then you scale the faster broken process, and you get to call it transformation. So let me say the through line plainly, because everything after this hangs on it. For 25 years, C-suite set strategy, RevOps ran it, a hierarchy. AI is collapsing that hierarchy. Where the two collide, a new role is being created. The company that names it and resources it from the CEO owns the system. The company that does not watches the strategy and operations collide every quarter with no one at the wheel. You can pick a side or get absorbed. So the next question follows directly. If the work is system architecture and not tool selection, whose job is the system? Most CEOs I talk to cannot answer that. They can tell you who owns marketing, who owns sales, who owns CS, and who owns RevOps. But nobody owns the system the four of them are supposed to be running on. And nobody is standing where strategy and operations hit each other. That is a structural problem we're about to take apart. 106, that's the average number of SaaS applications companies run. Not features, not integrations, 106 separate tools. Each with its own data model, its own vendor, its own update cycle, and its own team of humans who decided to adopt it without asking the person three desks over whether it would play nicely with what was already there. Here's the math that nobody on your management team wants to see written down. In a stack of 106 tools, complexity does not grow in a straight line. It multiplies. Add one more tool, and you do not add 1 unit of complexity. You add up 106 new connections that could break. That math is brutal. Your management infrastructure is linear. Your calendar is linear. Your RevOps team has a headcount you can fill. But the gap between complexity that multiplies and management that only adds up is exactly the gap that strategy and operations are colliding inside of. Not at the tool level, at the layer between the tools. And right now, in most companies, nobody is standing at that layer. The sequence, though, requires data, process, system, and application in that order. You have to characterize your data before you wire to a model. You have to redesign the workflow before you build the application. But most companies run this in reverse because the application is the part with the demo. Patching backwards from a slick demo costs you the one thing AI is supposed to give you, compounding results. A disconnected system cannot learn. Every initiative running on a disconnected data stays local, and it never feeds forward. So the line I want you to take from this is AI is a multiplier, not a corrector. It amplifies whatever it touches. Clean process plus AI delivers dramatically faster, dramatically better output. Broken process plus AI delivers dramatically worse output at scale with a confident tone. Add an AI layer dropped on a broken foundation produces outputs that look authoritative, but say nothing accurate. And I'll give you a confession on this. I've shipped AI demos that look clean in a board meeting and then surface confidently wrong answers the first time we ran them against real data, more than once. I've watched well-built models in the customer success layer, forecasting layer, renewal layer give confident wrong answers because the data underneath them was missing. It was stale or was wired to the wrong source. The model was not the problem. The layer underneath the model was. So now hear what I'm not saying there, because the takeaway from that confession is the most expensive one. I'm not telling you to stop and rebuild your data strategy before you are allowed to use AI. Nobody has clean data. I've never once walked into a company that did. If clean data were the entry fee, no one would be in the room. You start with the imperfect data you already have. You start imperfect on purpose with your eyes wide open. The actual fix has 3 parts, and none of them is a rebuild. First, you got to know precisely what is imperfect about your data, what fields are stale, which source wins, and when 2 of them disagree. Where identity resolution breaks. The flaw you have named cannot hurt you. The flaw you have not named is the one that ends up in the board deck. Second, build knowledge in the context around those imperfections so that AI inherits what your best operators know. Your best CSMs know that a certain field is garbage after a renewal and reads around it. That knowledge has to live in your system, not in their head. Third, build a system so that the data gets better every single time AI uses it. Every correction, every override, every this is wrong and here's why becomes an input to the data layer. The data layer is not the thing that you finish. It's a thing that you compound. And that's loop gain applied to your data. Each cycle leaves the data better than the last one found it. So when I say AI is a multiplier, not a corrector, hear it precisely. AI multiplies whatever system it is sitting in. Put it on a static and uncharacterized mess, and it multiplies that mess. But put it on imperfect data that you have characterized and wrapped in context, and wired to improve with use, and it multiplies a system that is getting better on its own. Same model, the difference is whether the thing underneath is improving or not. Here's the same point from a different direction. A wrong answer you can catch, but a hallucinated strategy looks right. One fails loudly and the other fails quietly while you continue to run your company on it. This is the mode that some companies are in right now, and they don't even know it yet. So let's bring us back to the collision. In most company, the answer to who is standing where strategy and operations collide is nobody. Marketing owns a piece, sales owns a piece, IT owns a piece, RevOps owns a piece, but they carry the weight of the entire thing without the authority to fix it. The system as a whole has no one at the impact point. You feel it in the broken handoffs, the conflicting metrics, the tools that do not talk, the pilot that worked in the demo and died in production. Every one of those is the sound of a strategy and operations hitting each other with no one there to absorb it. There is a strong thesis in the work I've been publishing on this. AI will do one of two things to revenue operations. It will absorb RevOps, automating reporting, process documentation, tool administration, the visible work of the function, or it will elevate RevOps to chief architect of the go-to-market system. There is no middle path. The work RevOps does today is the work AI is best at eliminating. Every major platform shift creates a genuinely new executive role, not an upgrade of the last one, a new one. New scope, new authority, and compensation to match. Cloud created the CIO. Mobile created the VP of mobile inside of every consumer brand. The web created the CMO as we know it today. And AI is creating one too. And it's being created exactly at the collision point, and it already has a name. But before we get there, let's walk through the three eras of RevOps and kind of showcase how they're evolving. Era 1, 2015 to 2021, they were tickets in, solutions out. That hierarchy held. Era 2, 2021 to 2024, the SaaS correction forced harder questions that RevOps teams who could answer them got promoted. And that promotion was the first crack. Era 3 is growth architect, and that is now. That is the era where the crack becomes the collision. And the numbers tell you where the market is heading. The VP of RevOps titles grew 300% in 18 months. 79% of organizations have a formal RevOps function, and by 2026, an estimated 75% of the fastest growing companies will run a RevOps model. But the headcount story is not the real story. The real story is what the collision does to the function. RevOps does not have one future, it has two, and the collision is what splits them. Path 1 is absorb. Operations gets crushed by the collision. When strategy and operations run into each other, the part of operations that is pure execution, like CRM administration, basic reporting, dashboard maintenance, data cleanup, has nowhere left to stand. AI does all of that. The traditional RevOps team shrinks or disappears. Be honest with yourself about this. The Salesforce admin role as a full-time job does not survive an AI-driven world. The work does not vanish, but the seat does. Path 2 is elevate. Operations becomes the owner of the merger. RevOps stops sitting underneath strategy and becomes the central node to orchestrating every GTM agent, human, and AI. The function owns system architecture, data governance, workflow orchestration, and AI governance. Operations is no longer executing the strategy. Operations is where the strategy lives. And the RevOps team becomes squads, product owners, GTM engineers, software engineers, orchestrating workflows and agents. The middle, which is RevOps as a support desk that builds dashboards and manages CRM fields, is part of the function standing directly in the path of the collision. Surface level RevOps, the dashboards, the reporting, the admin, is exactly what AI does first and does well. That whole layer will disappear. And we're kind of seeing that with a new role that's rising in the wild, calling a GTM engineer. And look at this hiring data. GTM engineer job postings on LinkedIn roughly doubled in half a year, from about 1,400 in the middle of 2025 to over 3,000 by January 2026. Across 2025, the role grew more than 200% year over year. And what you're seeing is Python, SQL, API integrations are now show up routinely in the job spec. That's not a Salesforce admin with a new title. That's a builder. GTM engineers are to revenue what DevOps became to software, the invisible engine behind speed, scale, and system intelligence. Now, I want to be honest about something. The GTM engineering community is getting it wrong, because if I leave it out, you may go hire one and copy the mistake. The role as it's being defined in practice today leans hard towards the top of the funnel. Look at where the talent is clustering: Clay workflows, outbound sequencing, lead enrichment, prospect automation, intent signal routing. It's acquisition obsessed. And that is a problem, and it is a familiar one. For a function that's supposed to be GTM, finally growing up into systems thinking, the GTM engineer community is repeating the exact mistake Jocko named on stage last week, treating revenue as something that happens before the signature. That is funnelism with a Python script attached. A real GTM engineer builds across the whole customer lifecycle. Acquisition systems, yes, and onboarding automation that cuts time to value from weeks to days. Pipeline orchestration, of course, and adoption scoring that predicts churn before the CSM sees the signal. Outbound sequencing, no brainer, and expansion triggers that surface upsell straight out of product usage data. Post sales equals pre sales. That's not a slogan. That is the math of recurring revenue. If your GTM engineer is spending 80% of their time on the left side of the bow tie and 20% on the right, you do not have a revenue system. You have a funnel with a new job attached. So here's the through line again. In the language of the function, the collision hits first. When strategy and operations collide, operations become strategic or operations gets absorbed. Elevate the chief architect of the system or get automated into a stack of background jobs. The middle is gone because the middle is exactly the layer the collision destroys. The CEO who names the choice and resources it will get a real advantage. The CEOs who pretend it's not happening will look up in 18 months, find their RevOps function doing the same work as last year, while their competitor has stood up a new executive seat right at the impact point. That executive seat is not theoretical. It's actually being hired right now. And this is the Winning by Design Growth Institute model job description for the role. They're picture built by the people who teach this stuff of what this seat should actually do. The profile that was written around a $60 million ARR company growing 100% year over year. It reports to the CEO or CRO. Here's what I want you to see before you read a word. The role exists because strategy and operations are colliding, and someone has to stand at that impact point. It's not a promotion. It's not a reorg. It is the structural answer to the collision this whole talk has been about. Read the CEO's note in the JD closely. We've built something that sells. That's not the hard part anymore. The hard part is making sure every function, product, marketing, sales, and customer growth is pulling in the same direction as we scale from 60 million to 300 million. Right now, each team is strong on its own, but we don't have one growth system. We have 4 functional plans that happen to coexist. I'm looking for someone who sees what I see, that the next phase of growth isn't about doing more of what works. It's about connecting what works into a system that compounds. 4 functional plans that happen to coexist. That is the collision described in the CEO's own voice. Without the vocabulary for it, the strategy is split across 4 functions. The operations are split across 4 functions, and no one's there to own the merge. And that gap, the merge nobody owns, is exactly what this role is built to close. Now, let me draw the line clearly, because this is where most companies are about to make the wrong hire. This is a VP of growth role. It's not a rebranded head of demand gen. It's not a marketing leader with a new title. It's not a growth hacker running around doing landing page experiments. And it's not a CRO with the word growth taped over the word revenue. The job description circling right now explains it plainly. You will not own marketing, sales, or CS. You own the constraint diagnosis of the growth model. This is not a semantic. This is the entire distinction between a system architect and a department head. A department head runs one function. This role stands where the functions collide. And what does it actually own? It owns the growth model, which is a single legible picture of how the business generates and retains revenue that every GTM leader can read, reference, and act on. That is the strategy half, not a dashboard, a model. The data architecture, which has 5 layers end to end, are connected and governed. This is the operations half. The point of the role is one person owning both halves because the collision is what happens when they are owned separately. Constraint diagnosis is the core operating job. At any given moment, the growth system is bottlenecked somewhere. It could be capacity, conversion, retention, pricing, ramp. Someone has to keep mapping where it is and re-diagnosing as it moves. The AI layer cross growth workflows with ROI on the hook. Not we are experimenting. Numbers against the spend and cross-functional alignment around one growth plan. One plan, not 3 reconciled at a QBR. And none of this is something that marketing, sales, or CS can own for itself. They are too close to their own motions. They are paid on their own metrics. They are built to protect their own budgets. The VP of growth sits outside that incentive structure. This is an entire point of the role. So here's one of your action items. And it's split 2 ways, depending upon where you sit. If you're an executive who owns the job description, do this. Pull up your VP of growth role, job posting. And if you have one, read it back to yourself. If it says manages paid channels or owns demand gen or runs growth marketing team, you're hiring for 2019. Pull it down, rewrite it from scratch around the 5 things that I just listed. Owns the growth model, owns the data architecture, owns constraint diagnosis, owns the AI layer with AI, aligns the org around one growth plan. And if you can honestly say you have a mandate strong enough to back a person doing those 5 things, you're not ready to hire for this role yet. That is a useful thing to learn too. And if you do not own the JD, if you're an IC, a manager or director, you have the more valuable job. Walk the 5-line roll into your CRO or CEO's office, name the collision. The person who brings a structured answer before leadership asks the structural questions ends up in the seat. So, what does this look like at 12 months? 5 metrics. Leadership talks about probability of hitting target, not just the target. The growth constraint is identified and visible. A unified growth model exists that every GTM leader can act on. Cross-functional reviews, they're run on shared data. NRR trends up because the system is working. The company can tell you why it's growing, not just that it is. If the answer is the market is strong, you had a good quarter, you don't have a growth model. So what does this person actually build? Underneath every go-to-market motion that compounds, there are 5 layers. They have to be built, they have to be connected, they have to flow. Signals flow up, guidance flows down. If any layer is missing, you have a hollow stack. And in a hollow stack, AI is not a tool. AI is a force multiplier of error. The model does not flag the hole, it fills the hole with confident, well-informed nonsense and feeds it straight to your forecast. I'm going to walk through the 5 layers slowly because if you take nothing else home, take this. First layer, layer 0, is the data model. This is the bow tie, a standardized representation of the customer journey from first engagement through expansion and advocacy. It's not a funnel, it's a life cycle. Without it, every layer above it is improvised. A practical example, most companies do not have one shared definition for a qualified opportunity across marketing and sales. Marketing has theirs, sales has theirs. They may be within 15% of each other, but that 15% is exactly where the trust between the two functions burns down. Layer zero fixes this. One model, one language. The same words mean the same thing in marketing's deck and in the sales forecast. Layer one is the data structure. 5 metric primitives applied consistently at every stage of the bow tie: volume, conversion, time, cost, and loop. Most companies measure conversion rates and stop there. The full set could tell you a different story. Time metrics alone surface problems conversion rates are blind to. A stage that converts at 30% better looks fine until you notice that the average time in stage doubled over the last 2 quarters. The conversion rate is hiding a velocity collapse. You only catch it when the structure is complete. Layer 2 are the operating metrics: productivity, velocity, unit economics, loop gain. You measure the go-to-market motion like a factory: throughput, bottlenecks, cost per output. A rep is a unit of capacity, a motion is a production line. Layer 3, performance metrics. This is the shift from point estimates to probabilistic guidance. Stop saying we will hit $20 million of ARR. Start saying we have a 70% confidence of hitting 20 million given current system behavior. And here are the 3 variables that move that probability. This is a language a board will eventually demand of you because it is the language of a system being run, not a target being hoped for. Layer 4, the investor scoreboard. Growth rate, CAC payback, rule of 40, magic number. Useful because investors use them. Dangerous when optimized for directly. The scoreboard is the output of a functioning system, not a substitute for one. So, one of the lines that I steal most often from Jocko: metrics without a data model are opinions. A data model without metrics is inert. If you write down one thing from this segment, write that down. Signals flow up, guidance flows down. The VP of growth owns that through line, one stack with one owner. That is the literal answer to this collision. And growth architecture frames this in 3 levers. Inputs do more, throughputs do better, growth loops grow smarter. 3 different ways to move the number. The first 2 look powerful, but they cap out fast. More inputs get you more output until you run out of inputs. Better throughputs get you more outputs until your process hits a ceiling. Both scale linearly, but both are finite. Only the 3rd lever compounds. The loop feeds itself. Output becomes the next cycle's input, and the next cycle's output is bigger than the last one. That is the lever that builds a moat, and that is why the number I'm about to put on the screen is not how much you put in or how well it converts. It's actually the loop itself. And that's what's called loop gain. This is the moat metric, the one number you should be tracking that usually nobody is. And I want to be precise about what loop gain is because it's not a new idea. If you think about how growth loops are measured, one of the things that you know is that they compound. Impact that returns are more impact. Loop gain is the number that tells you whether your loop is actually compounding or whether it just looks like that on a slide. It's the ratio of productive output that feeds back in as an input per cycle. If your loop gain is above 1, the loop compounds. Output beats input. Growth accelerates. And the moat widens on its own. If your loop gain is below 1, the loop is decaying. You're spending more than you're getting back, and no amount of headcount or tool can fix that because you are leaking. So this is the AI error warning that ties back to what we've been talking about. In a hollow stack, AI does not fill the gaps. It fills them with a hallucinated strategy that looks rigorous and walks the company off a cliff. A wrong answer you can catch. A hallucinated strategy looks right. The output looks like analysis. The chart is clean. The recommendation has citations, but the underlying data model is missing layer 1 and 2. So the recommendation is about a customer journey no one is actually on. You run on it for 2 quarters and then wonder why your retention dropped. Companies with complete connected stacks from day one are growing 2 to 5 times faster than their SaaS native predecessors. That is not a projection. That's what the data is showing right now in the AI native cohort. So let's tie it all back to where we are. Tourist mode runs on tools, resident mode runs on workflows, and architect mode runs on a complete 5-layer stack with loop gain as the moat metric. That is the architecture that moves a company from tourist to resident to architect. There is no shortcut. You cannot skip layer 0 and pretend layer 4 is your operating system. You cannot drop AI on layer 1 without layer 2 and expect it to compound. The order is the order. The good news is the order is also the path. You can see exactly where you are. You can name exactly what is missing, and you can stand up the missing layer in a quarter, not a year. The work is real. The map is now visible, and the job of the VP of growth is to walk the company up the map layer by layer until the system is complete and loop gain crosses 1. That work requires a different operating philosophy at the top. 3 logics have governed how companies get built over the last 40 years. 2 of them are closed, and 1 is where business is won right now. Manager mode was the dominant logic of the 20th century. Information climbed a pyramid. Rep to lead to director to CEO. 4+ rounds of compression. It built enormous companies, and its fatal flaw is latency. When the feedback loop has to run in hours, not quarters, the relay architecture becomes a liability. Founder mode was the correction. A 6-layer hierarchy really does compress signal into noise, but it has a hard ceiling. Roughly 30 people before the bottleneck becomes the founder's calendar. The moat is the founder's taste and velocity, and it retires when the founder does. Architect mode is where we are now. It keeps the speed and conviction of founder mode. It keeps the closeness to the customer, and it adds the piece neither prior era had, an AI native system at the center of the operating model. In manager mode, intelligence lived in the relay nodes. In founder mode, intelligence concentrated in the founder's head. In architect mode, intelligence lives in a system at the center, and every function connects to it directly. A churn event, a rejected submission, a support ticket, a closed deal, signal flows into the center and reflects back to whoever needs to act on it. This is what it looks like when the collision has been resolved. Strategy and operations are not 2 layers anymore. They are one system at the center, and the org is being rebuilt around it. Every interaction makes that system smarter. Now, in architect mode, the CEO's job clarifies into 3 things. Aim, army, assets. Aim, where are we going? AI can map the market, model scenarios, surface second-order effects, and run strategy, stress tests faster than any internal team. And you can use it aggressively. But what it will never do is tell you which hill is worth bleeding for. That's yours. As intelligence becomes more abundant, conviction becomes more scarce. Army, who are we going with? The talent gap between your best systems thinker and your average contributor widened from 2x to probably closer to 10x, and it's still widening. The honest CEO conversation that follows is uncomfortable. The people who got you here in error 1 or 2 are not automatically the right people for error 3. That is not a judgment on them, it's a judgment on fit. Assets. What do we deploy? Capital, attention, focus, brand, trust. The scarce resource in architect mode is not information. AI hands every company more dashboards, more data, more strategy documents than any team can act on. Most companies will drown in possibility. They will run 12 pilots, get signal from none. The CEO's job, the part that does not automate, is to decide with conviction, what are we doing and what are we not doing? Saying no to a plausible opportunity is harder than saying yes to it. So here's the single test for architect mode. Is your AI smarter today than it was yesterday without your involvement? If the answer is no, you're in founder mode with a better toolkit. You're not in architect mode. The compounding is the whole point. So now the ownership map is finally clean. And clean is exactly what a resolved collision looks like. The CEO sets AIM Army assets. The VP of growth owns the system. The GTM engineer builds the system. RevOps governs the system. The functional teams, marketing, sales, CS, are the generators the system is built to serve. Not subordinate, not customers, generators. Each one feeds signal in. Each one consumes orchestration out. The architecture is legible. The roles are clear. The mandate flows from CEO down to the VP of growth into the system itself. That is the destination. Now let me show you the path to it. Pick any cross-functional workflow in your org. Lead handoffs from marketing to SDR to AE. Deal handoffs from AE to CSM. Customer issue handoffs from support to product to engineering. Expansion opportunity handoffs from CM to AE. Count the steps. For each step, count the artifacts. CRM update, Slack message, ticket, meeting, email, shared doc. For each artifact, estimate the human minutes required to produce it and consume it correctly. Now, run that math at your company's scale. The coordination tax, measured in human minutes, runs to tens of thousands of hours a quarter, or at a typical mid-market GTM org, is detrimental. Most of it is invisible because it's spread across every function and nobody owns the total. Every one of those handoffs is a small collision between strategy and operations. The tax multiplies with scale. AI collapses it, but only if someone owns the collapse. So then you can transition into what I call a debt retirement program. 3 categories: process debt, the workflows built for humans and now hard-coded into how the company operates; tech debt, the number of tools that you have that's not integrated; and operational debt, the roles and rituals and comp plans built for the old model. You pay all 3 forever or retire them at once. And I would pay them in order. Process debt first because it's the cheapest to retire and it unblocks the other 2. You cannot integrate tools sensibly until you know what the workflow is actually supposed to do. Tech debt second. Once the redesign process tells you which integrations matter and which tools to drop. Operational debt last, because changing roles, rituals, and comp is the most expensive and most political. And you should only touch it once the process and the stack underneath are stable. Get the sequence wrong and you're reorg the team around a process that you're about to rebuild. So now, where do you start Monday morning? Not next quarter, not after the onsite, Monday morning. Pick one workflow you run weekly: the pre-call brief, the pipeline hygiene sweep, the renewal risk review, the QBR prep. Pick one that is most painful, runs most often, and has the cleanest data already feeding it. Make it a resident. That means scheduled, shared context that humans review the output. Humans do not generate the output. 3 feedback signals instrumented. Output is stored as structured memory, not artifacts in a folder. Then you measure the loop gain. And I mean measure it, not gesture at it. Let's take the pre-call brief as an example. The input is the analyst minutes it takes to produce the brief. The output is 2 things that you can count: rep minutes saved, because the rep did not assemble the brief themselves, plus the deals where the brief surfaced something the rep actually acted on: a stakeholder, a risk, a competitor. Add those up, divide the output by the input. That is your loop gain for that workflow. Then run it again next cycle with the memory of the first cycle built in. Cycle 2 should beat cycle 1. If it does not, the loop is not compounding and you have to fix the data underneath. If cycle 2 beats cycle 1, ship the next workflow. Then repeat. That's how you walk a company from tourist to resident to architect. Not in a single transformation, one workflow at a time, with the gain compounding across them. So let me leave you with the through line one last time, because this is a line you carry into the next budget cycle. For 25 years, C-Suite and others have set the strategy and revenue operations ran it. It's a hierarchy. AI is collapsing that hierarchy from both ends. Operations is becoming strategic because the system is the strategy. Strategy became operational because you cannot set a growth model you cannot instrument. Where the two collide, a new role is being created. The company that names it and resources it from the CEO owns the system. The company that does not watches the strategy and operations collide every quarter with no one at the wheel. You got to pick a side or get absorbed. Tourist, resident, architect. Pick the one that is true today, build the one that is true 18, 24 months from now. Use the 5 layers as the map. You do not need an AI strategy. You need someone standing where strategy and operations collide, a data spine underneath them, and a loop gain above one. Everything else is decoration. Pick one workflow this week, measure the loop, and tell me what you find.